My name's Nigel Godfrey. I'm the course leader on the youth work degree at the University of East London. I joined the university in 2010 after a long history of working in London youth work in the main, and a little bit of work abroad, but largely teaching canoeing and water sports and things like that. So I mainly worked in council use services and worked my way, if you like, up from the sort of orthodox youth club, a drop-in chill-out place for after schools, through to work on the streets and eventually management.
Yeah, I've been in youth service for 47 years now, so it's a long time. I started as a volunteer in the voluntary sector and started as became part-time just by design, and then ended up in a full-time position, which is great later on down the career. But I always had something else on the back burner. So youth work was always my sort of like part-time jump in, jump out, which was great. But I started off as a dance instructor and then ended up becoming a senior lecturer at UEL. So I've been here now, same like Nigel, since 2010. I was always interested in the work. I didn't know what it was when I started in the 70s, but it's very different compared to what it is now. And there's a lot to be done. There's a lot of good work going on. And as far as I'm concerned, joining the youth sort of sector and going further up was more to sort of inspire people to work professionally, understand that it is a valuable job, not just to sort of like, we just play with kids. And you know, I've been teaching now, lecturing, and I'm really about the reflective practice and the professional practice status within youth work. And as I said, teaching on, I've been program leader or course leader now we call it. I've worked in different settings with the education with psychology department, taking our work across other dimensions in the university. And I've also with education studies as well, and now psycho and social department over in Dockland. So it's kind of like we're expanding a little bit just by some of the subject areas, which are sort of like a framework for most teaching when you're working with youth, community, families. And that's where I'm at.
Hi, I'm Robin Lockhart. I run a social enterprise called Catalyst in Communities, who specialise, we mainly do youth work, but we also work with the wider community that young people are part of. My tie to UEL, I live in East London. I studied at UEL a long, long time ago. In fact, before it was UEL, but I didn't study anything to do with youth and community work. I was actually studying to become a surveyor back then. And 2 years into that degree, chose not to become a surveyor and left and became a community development worker in Waltham Forest, where I live. It was an introduction to a new way of approaching life for me. I was quite young, hadn't had much training in it, and literally the local authority said, here's a porter cabin on an estate, go and be a community development officer. And I really didn't know what that meant. So I just did what felt right for a little while. Turned some music on, turned it up, opened the windows. People started to say, what is this? What's going on? Just started to interact and let things happen. From that, ended up leaving that job and going into the music business, working with some of the bands that I'd met on these housing estates in East London where I was working, and becoming a manager of bands and a booking agent and various other things for a good number of years, and ended up with a studio and doing some recording work. But eventually, I said to myself, you know what, I really, really miss doing the work with young people full time. I'd always done some voluntary work, always done work around music, around creativity with groups of young people in youth clubs and colleges and schools. But eventually decided that that would be my career, and did a distance learning degree in informal and community education. And soon after set Catalyst up. We're in our 10th year now. The work that we do now at Catalyst tends to come from a youth coaching kind of an angle. We've done mentoring, we've done supervision, we've done all this sort of support and advice and guidance and all of the different approaches that seem to happen. But we're very keen on helping young people recognise that they're not ever the problem. I think we've got a situation in youth work where young people are often cast as being the problem. We're often referred to as the deficit model. You can only be a youth worker and meet a young person if they've got something wrong with them. We see young people as being the solution to the problems they're facing. They're not ever the problem. They're facing problems, but they're not the problem. And that's the kind of work that we enjoy to do.
Hi, so I'm studying at UEL. I've worked with young people, but within like a formal education setting. So now I'm kind of like trying to branch out a bit into the informal setting now. And I currently lead my church youth group as well. So I'm like the head of that at the moment. But it's been very different during the pandemic. But yeah, so I'm just studying now.
You know, I did mention I've been 47 years in wearing the shoes, but in reality, you know, I'm one of those people that probably back when I joined in the sort of 70s was looking at people, well, not probably even the age I'm at now, thinking they were so out of touch, you know, and they just had this old school mentality. So, you know, I kind of crave that new energy that comes in when you speak to students because they're actually doing it. And when you're not actually doing it anymore live, though my house is like a youth club at times before COVID, you know, you kind of miss out on not only the language that's being used on the street, but actually what's real to the young people on the street. And you don't want to come in being like this draconian adult, like stop doing that, young lady, young man, whatever it is, you know, and pointing the finger and see it from that. What's really going on in their world? What's really going on in their heads? And go with the flow. It's on social media. If it is, it's on social media. Now we have to correct our ways. You know, we have to not correct, but, you know, add to it, complement it. Don't sort of dismiss it, say, well, they're not seeing anybody, let's not do it anymore. You know, it's about joining what the young people are into. I swear, I have a young daughter. My youngest out of 4 children is 23. My eldest is 40, and I've gone through the rainbow with all of them. And even I've got grandchildren of a young age, of eldest 13. So when you look at it from a 40-year-old to a 23-year-old to a 14-year-old, and how they're so engaged with social media on different platforms, that I don't think they've missed anything in the COVID. They've actually been more in touch probably with everything. They still know what's going on. So let us use those examples and think you can still reach out. Let's not just give up and say, oh, I can't do placement, so it's all over. You know, you still can. It's just a different way.
I was doing some research on a project for teenagers that took place, at least in part, in Wales, in the mountains in Wales, on an event, in an adventure setting, if you like. And these young people, 16-year-olds mainly, they were climbing one day and canoeing the next day and hill walking the day after that, and these kind of standard activities. And I was doing some research. I was interviewing some of the leaders there who were a combination of, if you like, experienced outdoor pursuits instructors and youth workers of a fashion, at least, even if they didn't call themselves that. They were very experienced in working with teenagers. And I was very touched by one comment in an interview that one of the leaders said, which he said that the setting doesn't matter. Said the setting doesn't matter. It doesn't matter we're on a gorge walk. It doesn't matter if we're walking through the hills. It doesn't matter if it's raining or sunny. It doesn't matter if we're canoeing. It's the same thing. And that was a moment for me, because I was thinking, gosh, it certainly matters if it's raining, surely. But what he was referring to as we drilled deeper into it was what matters is how you build a relationship with the young people, each group. And he was saying part of the skill was reading the group, so getting a sense of who's there and what they're about and their levels of fears and anxieties and so forth. Building the trust that Robin was referring to in terms of you're in safe hands in my company sort of thing. And that's quite quick in outdoor pursuits, but in other sorts of work that can be a quite slow process in terms of building the trust. But essentially a rock climbing instructor is fast track really in terms of evidencing that nobody's going to die sort of thing. But again, a youth worker, I think, in different settings is creating a safe space one way or another. So it's the same but different or whatever. So it just sort of reinforced for me that it doesn't really matter where you end up doing this kind of work and what tools you're using, if you like, to create the bonds with young people. It's the bonds with the young people. And another thing that this particular leader said, and others were saying, also trained in that kind of work, was their role, they felt, was to stretch the young people. As simple as that. And I thought that was quite a good way of simplifying things, in terms of, we often talk about young people's journeys and taking them from the starting point, which will be something of a mystery at first, but making some sort of progress somehow with some sort of intervention. So if the intervention is a combination of the tools and the setting and the environment you're in and your sort of skill set, then the role simply is to make some advancement from the starting point of the young person. So that works in the outdoor setting. If somebody's terrified to even go out in the countryside or get to the top of a cliff ready for an abseil or whatever, they're already stretched, and you need to work with that in terms of reading the group, because youth work's a lot about group work, isn't it? As well as individual, sort of what we might call casework, less casework, really more group work. So you apply yourself to the group in an individualized way, but in holistically, we're just trying to make some sort of progress. So I think linking all these things together, if the pandemic has amplified existing issues, then our starting point would actually be the same as ever, which would be checking in with the young people, where they're at and what's going on with them at the point they're prepared to disclose these things, rather than scrutinise it with the sort of interrogative vigour that a policeman might do. So to gently establish what the starting point is, and then at an individual or a group democratised pace, if you like, work on progressing forward. And that might be baby steps in a way. They're talking, for example, of telling school children to spend this summer coming up, catching up on their missed classroom learning by going into a classroom. And I couldn't think of something less appropriate, to be honest. Thinking of the sun shining and youth workers are allowed to do face-to-face work, or young people are allowed to define their own recreational space, bring it on, and we need to support them to be understood in doing that, and to provide facilitation of that if we have the funds or the leverage to help in any way.
I'm not going to sit here and pretend that lockdown's been easy. I don't think it's been easy for anybody. But one of the central kind of tenets of all effective, impactful youth work is meeting young people where they are. And as Nigel was just saying, the setting doesn't really make that much of a difference. It can be if they're playing basketball, it can be if they're in a classroom, it can be if they're just cycling, it can be playing football, but it can also be on a screen. And that domain felt like it was brand new to most of youth work. That when we had to switch to doing stuff on screens, most of my colleagues who work for other organizations were saying, we're really struggling to get our heads around. How do we safeguard? What do we do? Do we need to, can we use Zoom? Is that going to be open to hackers? And all of these sort of made up problems that exist. If you're going to do youth work face to face in a room, those problems exist. We were already doing some stuff online. We've got a project funded by London's Mayor Office, working in the 4 ex-Olympic boroughs in East London, where we're helping young people to create, curate, and then commercialize their own digital content. So we were already doing some stuff online. What we had to do was to switch it so that we did everything online. And it's been suitable for some young people. I think what has been exposed through COVID is it's not a shock to youth workers that we live in a very unequal society. It's not a shock to youth workers that young people face prejudice of all kinds of horrible, different kinds of prejudice on a daily basis. And yet, some of the stuff that we encountered was a shock. You know, we had young people who felt better. You know, everyone was expecting young people's mental health to go off the charts and for lots of bad mental health to happen. And we had young people going, it's much better not going to school. I don't get teased about my shoes. I don't get teased that I'm poor. I don't get teased that, you know, I don't get bullied on the bus. It's great learning from home. And having access to a youth worker on a screen is wonderful too. Our work boils down to conversations. And the world of youth work is all about that conversational approach. And the world of coaching is about conversations. So we bring them together. And I think you can have a conversation on a phone, you can have a conversation on a walk, you can have a conversation on a screen, you can have a conversation in a room. And as long as those conversations do what Nigel was talking about and what Camelia was talking about as well, about stretching people's belief in themselves, about maybe helping them to see what they think is a problem from another perspective. And we have a process within our work we call the art of perception. Just helping people to see something from another perspective often negates the problem. They go, oh, it's not a problem anymore. All of that stuff can happen anywhere, anyhow. And you know what COVID did, I think, across the board, not just for young people, was expose the inequalities that are at the core of our world here in this country. It was a really difficult time for a lot of people in terms of just coping with COVID and Black Lives Matter and the environmental problems and unemployment and poverty. And you know, we've had to buy data for some of our young people. We've had to literally provide screens because they said, well, I haven't got a screen. We've got to know people's families much more and quicker than we would have done before if they were coming to a session, because we're in their house. Literally, you know, we're in their room, and I'm doing a one-to-one coaching session with a young person. I go, oh, is that your mum? Yeah, well, come and say hello quickly. And we end up coaching the family and working with the whole family. And some of that's been quite nice. We've also, I think, because of the nature of some of our work, we have been working with some quite vulnerable people, and we have been able to follow the NYA guidelines and be able to do some face-to-face work, socially distanced, one-to-ones, you know, picking up a couple of coffees and going for a walk with a young person. We've had to do some of that, and it's been noted that it's helpful. One of the core kind of quotes that we use in our organization all the time is that young people don't care how much we know until they know how much we care. And we put a lot of emphasis on building up that care, building up that level of connection, building up that trust and credibility. We have honed it, and I think that we've had to hone it because we're working with young people now around some quite complex issues who we've never met. Which is, you know, if you think back 12 months, that's kind of scrambles my brain a little bit. How can you be supporting somebody through some of the biggest challenges they've ever faced and you've never met them? So I think it opens up a whole new world of potential for youth work. I don't think that I want to ever stay online completely, but I think there's a place for it, and I think it's really useful. We've had some Zoom conversations with young people in East London, linking up with young people in India, young people in South Africa and the Caribbean, where they're able to have a conversation just like they're around the corner from each other. I think more of that is going to open up. I've got a connection with the Commonwealth. I'm a youth ambassador, global youth ambassador for youth work ambassador for the Commonwealth, and some of the youth groups there just sharing different perspectives on how it's been. What is life like in your area, in your country, is really useful for young people. And I think we've got to do whatever we can to continue to provide opportunities that make sense for young people. What we've recognised is some of the challenges we face here in the UK are kind of reversed elsewhere. We have a population in the UK that's rapidly aging. Most of the rest of the world, if it isn't, you know, similar countries to the UK, the youth population is rapidly expanding. You know, I had the pleasure of doing some youth work in Uganda, and I think something like 30% of their MPs are under 30 years old. Now, how different would politics be if we had 30% of our MPs under 30? I think that we need to recognise that this opportunity that COVID has brought, the world has agreed that human life is the single most important thing. It needs protecting. We've had, you know, across the different sectors, we've taken away all the red tape to deal with this one problem. We've got commercial companies, working with charities, working with government, working with volunteers, working with local authorities to address COVID. If we can do that around COVID, can't we do that around knife crime? Can't we do that around poverty? Can't we do that around famine? Can't we do that around other diseases? Can't we do that around, you know, all of these challenges that we're facing? How can we, let's put ourselves in the future and say, like, in 12 months, COVID's gone, and we talk about it a bit like smallpox, you know, we managed to eradicate it, it's gone, everything's okay now. Conversations we've been having with young people is, so there's never going to be another war then? But we can't go back to invading other countries and bombing people if human life has been accepted as being the one thing. And I think that young people are fully aware of this now. You know, this time, we're living in a time where, I don't know, when I was the age of some of the young people we're working with now, I would have struggled to find out news about what was happening elsewhere. Now, it's all, information is at a click of a button. Young people are far more aware of the prejudice that they face, the inequality that they're being challenged by. And quality youth work enables them to do something about it. I heard recently that, you know, Step Up to Serve, the big organization that was set up to push youth volunteering in this country, is gone. It's closed. You know, we need our young people. They're not separate to us. They are core to our future. You know, I'm getting on a bit too. Some of the young people that I work with might be in positions of power that we need them to be able and ready to make good decisions. And what I think COVID has shown us is that there are new ways that can be adopted. I think across the board, it's shown me, certainly, I speak for myself rather than all the young people, is that some of the sort of institutions that we rely on, these big lumbering things like the NHS, things like the education system, even so far as things like the process of democracy, it's crumbling. It's not fit for the 21st century. We have an adversarial political climate, literally, where they're arguing against each other, they're facing each other, ready to fight. I mean, they used to fight with swords in Parliament. We need some changes, and young people have always been at the forefront of changes. They know what needs to change. They know what needs to happen. And, you know, on a global basis, they were on the streets before lockdown. They were, you know, ready to storm Parliament in several capital cities. I'm not trying to promote revolution or any of unrest at all, but I think that there needs to be a recognition from us, from our age group, that actually the young people are the solution here. What ideas have you got? How do we need to change things? How can we make this better? Because if we don't, it's going to be even more challenging.
Yeah, it seems to me that there's a big conversation that's going on. There's a big conversation that's likely to be sustained. And in the same way that, for example, you get perhaps my parents' generation who had this shared experience of the Second World War and how that still resonates, 70 years later? I think it's going to be there in terms of kind of, I was there.
Yeah. This is a pivotal point, isn't it? And
yes, I think it is. It's historic.
We've been working with, we've been encouraging them to keep video diaries.
Sure.
And at first they were like, well, what for? I'm not putting on YouTube. Who's this for? And we said, it's for your grandchildren.
Yeah.
What did you do during that time, Dad, Granddad? And you'll be able to show them and share something of, but the decisions and the choices that we make as a society now are crucial. We're at a crossroads in so many different ways. And I truly see that young people are the answer to this problem.
I guess for myself, I'm quite lucky because where I support the young people at the church, I have that interaction with them. So I kind of understand what they're mentally going through with both personal and school life. So the frustration for school, I can completely understand. But like Robin said, some of them do enjoy it. Some of them are happy. Like my niece, she's 13 and she was loving it. And they find out all these little hacks, you know, like they'll screenshot the answers or something. It's quite funny seeing how they're using technology really to their advantage at the same time. But the problem is for me, I find it is the mental health aspect of it as well, which is like a really big concern because a lot of them turn to social media to voice how they're feeling or to express themselves or engage in conversations with young people. And that's where the safety of them is at risk. A lot of situations as well with young people get, kind of blown out of proportion. online as well. They get really triggered by the smallest things, and there's so much offense taking place now as well, because there are really big discussions taking place, like for example Black Lives Matter as well. There are young people that want to speak about it, but then there are some young people that are actually not educated to the point where they understand what's going on. They don't really understand the history of why people are protesting to this point, because at the same time they're not having that physical interaction to really understand it. It's all online. What they're learning is all online. So I think I see it from that way. And with the young people I speak to, we try and get as much conversation going as we can, so that they really can express themselves, they can talk about things, and they're allowed to voice their opinion. Because I mean, it's different having an online conversation to like in school with your friends, really having a conversation and getting the emotion out there as well. And yeah, so it's been quite different, I think.
Rachel, what you've said is so true, and I think that this is my perspective. I don't want to speak for anybody. It seems to be reported that young people's mental health is worse than it's ever been. That seems to be what people are saying. There's more diagnoses, there's new conditions, there's loads of other conditions, and there's more and more young people being diagnosed. I think that there's a flaw in the process. I don't think our mental health comes from anywhere but us. And I think I've met young people who have had, a whole list of diagnoses. They don't know whether they're ADD or ADHD or PTSD. They don't know. They just get told something and then they get their medication changed. And I think that if you feel connected, if you feel valued, if you feel valuable, if you feel included, if you know that you've got people around you who care, you're far less likely to get any of those diagnoses. The resilience that it takes to deal with trauma comes from within us. The emotions that we display that could lead to us being diagnosed with something emanate from us. They don't come from the external world. And I think that the more we can remind young people of their own strength, their own resilience, their own capabilities, the less likely they are to be diagnosed with anything. I hate the fact that we're medicating people for behaviors.
Here.
Can't get my head. You've got ADHD, so basically take this speed. Take pharmaceutical grade amphetamine, even if you're 8 years old. That's not the way forward. When I meet somebody who's got ADHD, I've worked with a 6-year-old with ADHD, and he loved his toy cars. When I first met him, he was on the floor playing with his toy cars. And I said, "Oh, you like cars?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "I think you're a Ferrari, and I'm a broken old VW Beetle. Nobody's taught you how to drive yet, have they?" He went, "I don't know how to drive." And I said, "That's why you keep getting into trouble. You're bouncing off the walls like a Ferrari would if you didn't know how to drive." I think that there's so much scope for a better world with young people. The young people are not separate to community. They're the heart of it. We need them. They're the core of it all. And the more that we do to help them feel better. I spoke to a young person during this lockdown, not the first bit, this lockdown, who was suicidal. He said, "I don't think I can make it through today." And we had a conversation on a screen where I said, "But what's your track record of making it through difficult days?" And he went, "What do you mean?" I said, "Have you had difficult days before?" He said, "Yeah, I've been struggling for years. You know that. You've read my case file." I said, "But your track record is 100%. You're fantastic at getting through difficult days. You're the expert." And he was like, "I never thought about it like that." There's always an alternative way of seeing something, but we don't need to problematize young people. We don't need to diagnose young people so much. I'm not saying there's never a need for a diagnosis or medication. There are circumstances where that can happen. But if we make up a disease, a condition, and then go and look for people who fit our definition of that condition, we'll find them. It doesn't mean they've got a disease.
But can I say, Robin, on that, this is where the learning and teaching is so important, because as well as it's about young people, what you have is the drive with widening participation, is that getting into university, getting that degree has become like the new status symbol for the mature, you know, it's like almost if you don't have that, then forget it, you'll go nowhere, which we know is not true. And I think for the years, I don't know, Nigel can probably say it too, for the years of meeting and greeting people and taking through the course, which I thoroughly enjoyed, get a really nice bag of students, you know, mixed bag. But, you know, you will always, it does weed out the process. Sometimes that process of ticking the right boxes can sometimes weed out the best people, because I always say to people, it doesn't matter, you come to the university, you will all walk out of here with a degree unless you don't attend and come, right? And don't focus so much on the first, the 2-1, the 2-2, the third, because it's great from a statistical perspective, and you know, and I understand that for saying that we're doing and we're improving our university, but I'd hate to lose sight of people who genuinely have great work ethic and struggle with the paperwork side of it, because then again, it's almost like, well, are we going to do that to our young people and say, well, you can't write, so off you go, you know? And we have to see it that the actual program that the NYA, that what we're trying to say is that we are the same in a certain sense, that we may not have those top end skills, we may not be really eloquent at this and that, but we care and we want to do. And to the best of our practice with the safeguarding issue is, and a good heart. I mean, you just got to have a good heart as well, because the first thing I said to students when they come, I said, if you don't actually like people, don't bother to attend, because, you know, everything about your work is going to go above and beyond dealing with all different kinds of behaviours, types of people. You cannot judge people. You have to question yourself every time, because 24/7 it comes up on everything, you know, like you say, the bullying, social media. If you're not this, you're not that, you know, that kind of, I mean, I went to school for all the years of my life, and to be told what I would never amount to, you know, that was school. And most of the people that we get coming through really, really, really want to work with the community because of their experience, because of what they've been through, and they want to make that difference, and they want to transition young people. They don't particularly want to be policing young people, like you say, and just saying, well, they won't amount to anything, so we need to just get paid to keep them away from the streets and make politicians happy. You know, it's really about that caring and sharing and trying to fit, because I did have an issue with some of the targeted, and I do a module on that, you know, about targeted youth provision, about where did the targets come from? Did you say you wanted that target? Now, are you working to a target? You know, it's like you're meant to be working with 30% of the youth population, but you can only count one interaction. You can't count all the interactions. All these things that I did when I was managing Tower Hamlets. And it was a very big sort of process that, how can you stop a young people say, right, I've done one outcome with you, so go away now. I need a new, fresh person. You know, I thought youth work is, I've been working with young people from, because I did disability as well, from 5 years old to 25. But what am I going to say? Like, no, sorry, can't serve you anymore. Off you go. I've done your one outcome. I've ticked the box for the target, and now go on. See you later. And it puts a stress on somebody who's getting paid by the person who pays you is a person that you bow down to, isn't it? You know, nobody wants to lose their work. So I think there's a sort of like the targeting of expectations from, you know, say central government and the policy papers, and the targeting that is real, and like you don't understand. I mean, I did the same like you. I worked for the London's mayors, and I really got into lots of arguments with the way they wanted to report, you know, about the money they were giving me to spend, and how it was just a showpiece in one sense that did some really good work as well that we managed to do. But the person they actually sent down to audit was a person who wanted his targets met and didn't understand that. So if you phone a person, you know, that's not an outcome. I said it is an outcome for some, because the fact that you've made contact and the fact that you're engaging is a process, but you can't expect one phone call and a person goes here, there and everywhere. I said it's a process, and I think I made them change their auditor after I ran him out the building. But you know, it's those kind of things, the battles we go against. So I'm just trying to say that when we get targets and when we're getting paid for targets, it does become the sort of like other end of the job, which is management is not so pleasant, because, you know, it's related to that, and it does put a lot of pressure on what you can and cannot do, where it's almost like it dictates those you can work with. And we have to be aware of that some of these policies create barriers rather than opportunities to our young people.
We've got a problem here that we might have a whole generation being misunderstood as being miserable, unresilient. Another way young people are demonized is not fit for the workplace or whatever. So there's a potential of buying into that narrative, overloading that narrative and saying, we understand young people, give us the money, we will be that task force, because of this explosion of mental health issues. I have somebody who's trying to square that circle in youth services, who's using NHS style tally sheets to monitor young people's journey, essentially by saying, you know, what's your kind of score mental health wise and other wise on first meeting. He does music as well as his main tool, but it could be any tool. After using this tool and building this relationship, where do you score yourself now? And I thought that was quite a stroke of genius, because I recognised immediately the government would love that. But now I'm troubled that it's colluding with making a medical condition where there isn't one. So, you know, most of the great philosophers going through the centuries back to the ancient Greeks and before that, you know, have all sort of come to the conclusion that generally kind of life's shit and then you die, you know, so you need to be philosophical about the peaks and troughs in there. And yet there's a potential, as you've identified there, Robin, that we'll end up giving a whole variety of drugs or other interventions that are considered necessary in the name, under the banner of understanding young people and individuals better, but actually on the misunderstanding, that's the last thing you should be doing.
Horrible scenario, eh? We need to measure this stuff, and sometimes the temptation is to measure it based on somebody who, it's like asking an electrician to come and inspect somebody's plumbing work. Like they don't, the people measuring it don't quite understand the work.
No.
So we were given the Warwick Edinburgh scale to do some of our well-being work with young people. It's a recognised scale, and they said, ask these questions. So we were like, it's a condition of the grant. Okay. When we handed our results in, one of the questions is, and I can't remember it word for word, it's something like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how safe do you feel on your journey to and from school, college, or work? 1 being very safe, 10 being completely unsafe. Loads of the young men we were working with back then said 1. So the funder said, this is amazing. They all feel so safe. And I mean, there's nowhere for us to record the follow-up question. Like when we asked them these questions, we said, what's behind that answer? So one boy said, I feel really safe on the way to and from school, college, and work. In fact, I feel really safe everywhere because everyone knows my big brother. And if they come near me, he'll kill them. Now that should have been a test. That's not the right answer.
Yeah.
On paper, it looks like a great statistic. It's horrific.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of that is going on. When we look at stuff on paper, we go, yeah, this person's good. Young people are not spreadsheets. People are not percentages. People are not bar charts. You can ask somebody the same questions on a Monday and then ask them on a Friday. You get 10 different answers from the same person. It doesn't mean their mental health has shifted. It means they've given different answers. What are we measuring?
Yeah, I think also, as well as denying that flux of thoughts and emotions and where you would score yourself, it somehow sort of illegitimizes things like, I'm angry. You know, it's like, that's not an illegitimate emotion. It's catalogued as a behavioural issue far too often, but it's okay to be angry or mildly depressed over something that's depressing, or something where you're being completely misunderstood.
I mean, anger is for me, in our practice at Catalyst, anger is a secondary emotion. It's like a pretend emotion. If somebody's displaying anger, or everything that comes from anger, violence to others, violence to self, all of that is rooted in anger. Anger's an emotional expression of pain and hurt. So when somebody's out there displaying anger and violence, our approach is to say, who hurt you? And if we can deal with the pain and hurt, the behavior no longer makes sense to that individual. If they can process what they've been through, see it from a different angle and go, oh, then maybe that could make me stronger.
Yeah.
Then they can't be angry anymore.
But the compulsion is to go stop that right now, or you're excluded or whatever.
Something that's been alluded to, it's been beneath or in between all the words that we've all said, is that it's nurturing young people and children is the single most important job any society has. And we haven't done it in this country. Is it the UNICEF League? They publish every few years of how you treat your children and young people. We used to be regularly, always in the top 10, but usually in the top 5. I think the last time it came out, which was pre-lockdown, we were 146th. Now, what are we saying about this country's future if we don't treat our young people and nurture them and guide them and support them and help them if we can?
Coming from myself, an Indo-Caribbean background, mental health was looked at like you're mad. If, for example, my mum, she suffered with mental health issues, but my dad's side of the family didn't really consider it important, whereas my dad did. He was different, so he actually did respect her and he did like try and take care of her. But there's a lot of my family that were completely ignorant to it, and it was like, well, you don't know our hard life and what we've gone through. And people have to break that generational thing in your mind, oh, because they had it hard, no one else is going to have it hard, or I've had it harder, that whole thing. And I get it, each generation has their own struggles. I can't say I understand my great-grandparents' struggle of going from India to Guyana. I have no clue, but I know the struggle that my dad had coming over here with the racism in the late 60s and 70s. I know that situation, but again, I've only probably experienced maybe 10% of the racism he had. So for myself, again, it's like educating young people to all these different levels, because it stems from so much. There's so much that we have to dive into when it comes to the mental health aspect. And because with COVID, it's been a lot more difficult being able to reach out to them and organize things and events, or go into, youth clubs, anything like that, to really understand it. Because unless, like my sister, she's a pediatric nurse, so she gets like the influx of young people who are suicidal, and girls who have been harming, or boys who have been taking drugs, etc. So she sees it, but until you're like really on the front line, people have no idea. Like that's a pandemic in itself right now.
I don't want it to come across as me saying that there is no such thing. I know suicide is rocketing. I know self-harming is rocketing. I know these things are happening. I think that it's never the trauma that we face or we go through. It's our response to the trauma that impacts whether or not we get through it. So very few people who have been through traumatic incidences ever hear talk of post-traumatic growth. They talk about PTSD. Like, if you go through a trauma, you might be traumatized. You might have to deal with this for the rest of your life. You'll carry it with you. I've heard young people have said to me, I've inherited my trauma from my parents. Why are we telling them that? It's your response to the traumatic incident that determines whether or not you feel okay. It frightens me that we are just pathologizing behavior. You can go through something horrific. Take, for instance, this focus on adverse childhood experiences, the ACEs. It's a buzzword at the moment. If you have an ACE, you will go on to, you're more likely to go on to become violent.
Yeah.
It's not true. More people have adverse childhood experiences and don't become violent than do.
Yeah.
So it's not the adverse childhood experience. I'm not taking anything away from that. That's the stuff that happens to those people when their children is horrific. I've had some adverse childhood experiences. A lot of people do, but very few people go on to become violent. So I think that what we're talking about here is the difference between causation and correlation. So they do have an adverse childhood experience and some people do become violent. That doesn't mean that this causes this. I can remember seeing a debate years ago. It was, do you remember when they reclassified cannabis? They brought it to a class B, or I can't remember what the classification levels were. And there was a big discussion around, are we opening up, a gateway to other drugs? The one guy was arguing that, if you take cannabis, you're far more likely to go on and use cocaine and other things and heroin and all the horrific stuff. And then this doctor who had studied this, it was his specialism, came on and he went, I think you'll find that 100% of heroin users use buses before they use heroin. It doesn't mean that using a bus causes you to use heroin. There's something else going on here. We need to zoom out and look at the bigger picture. The bigger picture is the inequality, the racism, the prejudice, that all of that stuff that's impacting people determines how they respond to things. And if we can help people to learn to value themselves and to be able to recognize that they have other responses that they may not have tried yet, they can learn a new response, we can share, you can teach me a new one, she can teach us a new one. We give them more of a chance, of getting through that without the pathologizing, without the diagnosis, without the medication, without the sort of limitations that that places on somebody.
It does.
If you believe that you've got a mental health condition, you're far less likely to believe that you can achieve with it. There's loads of people who are a bit high achievers who have a mental health condition.
But Robin, isn't that like the self-fulfilling prophecy? You know, it's the same old story. You know, like you say, you're told what you can't do and then you achieve it. You stand back and spend so much time wondering how you got here that you start missing out on life, because then you feel like you're a fraud. There's also that as well. I've always said to our students, you know, young people are very resilient. They find coping mechanisms. They know how to cope. They know how to survive. Survival is a big kick-in of surviving. And yes, it is unfortunate that some young people aren't able to travel through that bit of getting a little bit, you know, through it, or have that support. And it's nothing to do with anything more than that. This is just the time, the moment, the place where they just could not cope, and there was no hand to reach out to. In some cases, I feel that they still, even if you can have the most support in the world and still be misunderstood.
Yeah. What we've been doing hasn't worked. So we have this dialogue all the time that because of this deficit model, because of the focus on what's wrong, we've ended up spotlighting. Like, can you imagine living your own life only ever talking about and discussing and focusing on and researching all the stuff you didn't want in your life? I'm not doing any more anti-knife crime, anti-drugs, anti-gangs projects ever. We do pro-peace, communication skills, collaborative projects that deal with the problem, but they don't deal with the problem by focusing on it.
I think you hit the nail on the head there, taking away the labels of things. You know, I mean, that's really it. I mean, I think when you start pushing a label, I mean, that's another subject that we teach. You know, I said, you know, when we label people like teenage mother, there's a whole kind of, whether it's you are going to be this, you're going to have no money, you're reckless, you're feckless, you're this, and go from that perspective to start working. And I try and tell students, take away those thoughts of people by a label, you know.
But a label is just the lens that the person labeling has looked through. It can feel like this is a real uphill battle and there's so much to change and the whole world needs to change. It's really difficult. But from our perspective, all that needs to change is the lens. If we continue to view things as problems, we can't be shocked that we find them to be problematic. If we say to a young person, you're very challenging, then don't be surprised that they challenge you. If we change the lens and see the young people as the answer, the solution, the future, that they're behaving in ways that make complete sense based on their belief system. If we can help them and show them that the belief system they've been behaving to is actually BS rather than just a belief system, the behavior changes and then the problem's gone. If we label people, then they'll perform to those labels. We all do.
My son, when he was about 5 or 6, he kept getting excluded from school, and I could see like them kind of labeling him with this thing and saying, oh, you know, we were thinking about testing him for ADHD and all this. I was like, no. I said, you know, me and his dad just broke up. He's going through a difficult time. He's changing. He's seeing changes. I'm going to sort it out. And I think as a parent, you have to understand, obviously, the emotional changes and things. And I worked hard. I can't lie. You know, like I worked really hard in terms of pastorally supporting him, educationally supporting him, emotionally, all of those things, because that's my job as his mum to do that. You know, when people were trying to brand him, and then I could see just this singling out thing going on, and, you know, say if a child hit him, they'll be very quick to tell me when he hits a child, but not when he's come. So he's come home and say, oh, this kid kicked me, and I haven't received any information about it. And I didn't want him to fall into this bracket. I've worked with young boys that have, you know, again, fallen into that as well. I've seen it, and I hate when they play into it. It really frustrates me when they actually allow that person to get the satisfaction of saying, oh, well, you're just like this and you're just like that and this is what's going to happen. And it frustrates my soul so much. So that's why I'm really passionate about it, because with my own son, I could see that happening.
A recent experience with my youngest, he was falling out with everybody in authority because he was messing about at school, and it did make me laugh because, you know, I mean, I asked him why, first of all, why he was doing that. He was like, well, I'm my father's son. It's like, oh yeah, right, okay, yeah, okay, here we go. But it was a similar sort of thing. He was bored and didn't want to be there. But he had a plan that nobody was listening to, and that was to, in this case, drop out of sixth form and get in the real world, and ideally do an apprenticeship and just abandon A levels. And this was considered absolutely alien and deviant and, you know, disapproved of, until a youth worky type careers office, so, and a youth worky type dad just went, well, let's make it so. And, you know, he's absolutely thriving on an apprenticeship. Never finished his A levels, but has got higher qualifications in vocational qualifications. So it all starts with listening. And I suppose what I picked up, though, is there's a nuance to it, is like not over listening to the person that almost prompted the question.